All right, good morning and welcome. UAB returns to Protective Stadium this Saturday at 1 o'clock to host North Texas. So with that, I'll turn it over to Coach Alex Mortensen.
Hey, guys. Obviously this was coming off this last game, frustrating, very disappointing game from an outcome standpoint. Had an opportunity to win the game and didn't. And I think when you look at it, there are a lot of things to evaluate and assess and to dig into, but let's start with the good thing. The good news is I do think we are starting to play closer to the level of effort that we want, toughness, competitiveness for 4 quarters. I think that is showing up. I think you saw it with our defense in terms of their production, particularly in the 4th quarter. So that's one thing, that we've really emphasized is the first thing we've got to try to get right, just straight up, is our effort. We've got to get our effort right, and that is really, I think that's moving in the right direction in terms of guys playing hard and tough. I think the area we've got to really improve is our discipline. And I think that ultimately is what cost us the game. I think that discipline manifests itself in a couple ways. One way, I think most obviously to anyone that watched the game, is if you second half penalties. I think we went into the half with 3 penalties, and we came out I think in the second half we had 8 penalties, which I think got us to 11 total on the game. And a lot of those, the discipline part, if you were to say, hey, defense and special teams, it kind of reared their head through penalties, and which really kept the other team on the field and gave them opportunities when we were actually playing pretty good and putting ourselves in position to get stops. So on offense, that discipline really shows itself in a different way. It shows itself through execution. Some of these things may not be obvious to a TV viewer or if you're sitting in the stands, but just basic execution of guys doing their job. We made some plays in the game. We went in the half with 17 points. And we made a couple off-schedule plays, which is good. We got guys that can make plays, that can compete for the ball, that we can extend plays at the quarterback position. But we also had a lot of routine plays through all 4 quarters of the game that we didn't make. Whether that's as simple as, and ultimately this is my responsibility. I got to get our offense to play better. But this goes way beyond play calling, plan, scheme. It's really getting the guys to play better inside the confines of the offense. That starts with, hey, Ryder's is still a young player. It's his second collegiate start, but getting him to make better decisions, to process better when we've got some simple things, when we've got people open, getting his eyes in the right place. And some of these things, we're not talking about 5 and 6 yard gains. We're talking about being, missed opportunities to generate explosives, getting a receiver to run the route the way he's coached to run it. And, hey, you ran it that way in practice. Why are we changing in the game? Can we trust our training? That's a lack of discipline. Whether it's a running back, good players, some of the best players on our team, but if we coach you, hey, we got to follow the second puller on a counter play, and we're going to split the defense wide open, we got to follow the second puller on a counter play. So effort, toughness, will to win, competitiveness, really good place. I think we've made strides there. But the discipline to execute down in and down out is an area we're still working to improve, and it cost us Saturday. We're not here to try to criticize our players. We're here to teach them, And so when they get in today, we're going to show them these things. We're going to try to teach them these things, and we're going to, really. And sometimes that can be painful for a little bit too. But we talk about, hey, you either deal with the pain and discipline of the effort and the focus to have discipline, or you deal with the pain of regret. And unfortunately, a lot of guys will experience the pain of regret, but it's going to be an opportunity to learn from. And we're going to really show them some things. We're going to show them, hey, here is this play against the coverage you got in the game, and we do the wrong thing, whether the route's incorrect or we don't run it with the right technique and detail, or we don't throw it to the right guy, or our eyes aren't in the right place. And here it is 2 years ago on an offense that set a school record here against the same coverage, the same look, and it went for a 60-yard touchdown. Not by doing anything extraordinary, but by simply doing your job. So I think if we can, really, really pleased with where the effort, toughness, discipline, or effort and toughness part's gone, competitiveness, but we've got to make strides in this discipline area, both, as I mentioned, from penalties. We got to eliminate dumb penalties, and then we've got to on offense, we've got to play with fundamental discipline. And I think our guys, expect them to be receptive and to learn from that. I touched on the quarterback. He Again, in his second start, did some good things. Still, believe he's going to have a very bright future. But I also, think we're going to help in there's things to correct and things to improve and move on from. And I think he'll be prepared to do that. So anyway, that's that last game. Moving on to this game, we're taking on North Texas, who is a very, very good team. They're 8-1. I think they're getting some top 25 votes. A lot of their wins are with a pretty large margin of victory. They've been pretty dominant. They've got obviously their head coach is Eric Morris, and he's been there, I think, going into this is his third season, and they've done a really good job there. They've done a good job recruiting. They've recruited the right way. They've done a good job with their roster. They're a well-coached team. They're very explosive and dynamic on offense. Their quarterback, Drew hopefully I'm pronouncing his name properly. I apologize, but Drew Messmaker, is a really good player. Top of the country in a lot of categories, and Coach Morris has had a reputation of doing a good job with his quarterbacks for some time, or he's at least been around really good quarterback play. And then defensively, they do a really good job too. They've made some strides on defense. Again, talk about the roster. I think they've recruited well. They've got really good players at all three levels. They've got good athletes. They're the first year in a new system, but it's a good scheme. It's sound. It's well thought out. So they do a really good job. They've made real strides there defensively. So definitely going to be a challenge to take these guys on. We're obviously playing them at home, and one thing I'll say is the support from Blazer alum has been really encouraging, and we're really appreciative of that. People that have reached out to help and extend their support. And I think when you look back at the Memphis game, which was our last home game and a game we won against a top 25 team, I do think our crowd and our fans, played a factor in the game. We were really grateful and appreciative of them showing up and also, being as loud as they were. So would certainly want to encourage our fan base to be involved and active in this one too.
With the discipline, when you're not seeing the results on the scoreboard, when you're struggling with 3 wins, what's the key, I guess, or the formula to keep guys from getting frustrated because of that? Right.
Yeah. I think, when you talk about, game day, at some point, you hope becomes a reflection of practice habits. And so, if you listen to some things I've talked about over the last few weeks, people say, hey, how was practice? How was practice? And a lot of times I say it was good, but it's not quite where we want it yet. And so, we're really working to try to get guys to really understand what a great practice looks like, what we expect, what is our standard for practice, because if we can create the right practice standards, then we create the right habits, and then they show up under a stressful situation in a game. And I think that's really where it starts, and there's a cumulative effect of practicing the right way for a long period of time and holding guys accountable and holding to a standard. And so I think that's really a big part of it. And I also think, though, too, guys can buy into, hey, you reap what you sow, and if you do it right, you're going to have a lot of positive success, and you're going to have, and it's going to not only help our team, it's going to help you as an individual. So I think, and again, we're prepared when these guys come in to show them some very clear examples, like I mentioned earlier, of, hey, let's look at this. Okay, hey, even some of our guys did a couple extraordinarily great things in the game. I do believe we have some guys that can make some plays. But then I can turn around and show them, hey, when you kind of went off the reservation, you did your own thing, as opposed to, hey, doing exactly what we're coaching you to do. If you do that, and it's just a routine, simple thing, it's going to generate a game-changing play. And then obviously the cumulative effect of, having 10, 12 of those in a game. So, and I know a lot of people have made a lot on, hey, is it going on the road? Is it this, that, the other? I do think we've also got to continue to coach and talk about, the psychology of a competitor. And like I said, I think the effort part, I think anyone that's watching us, I think you're seeing guys play with better effort and toughness, closer to what we want. But the other part of that, competitive psychology is also, keeping your emotions in check, and not letting those go off the rails, because sometimes when you get so emotional, you lose your mind and it affects your decision making, and you start doing things that are uncharacteristic. So even if you have created a good habit structure, if we don't go into the game with the right mindset, I think it can really affect guys negatively. So that's something, I can't snap my fingers and we can't make those things happen overnight, but we're working to do those things. And I do think we have a lot of guys that are bought in that want to do it, and they want the coaching and the help.
obviously you can't take away the defensive penalties in the second half, but the stops they made in the fourth quarter, and
Yeah.
when they were playing discipline, do you think they really grew a lot as a defense in that second half?
Yeah, no, I do. I think look, like I said, I think the defense played really well. They played well enough to, despite the penalties, which are inexcusable and like it's not the kind of football we want to play. They played really well, and they played well enough to win that game. If the offense does their job. So I think that is a good thing. And again, I take a lot of that back. I think our defensive staff has done a really good job with their planning. But I also think the kids, again, playing with relentless effort, playing competitive, playing tough, I think you got to acknowledge that shows up. But now that being said, even the offense not playing well as they needed to defensively, now imagine, okay, get rid of those penalties. Now imagine how dominant that performance is. So to me, a lot of good things there from an effort standpoint and an execution standpoint. But their discipline errors, like I said, on offense showed up more in execution. Defensively, it shows up more in these unforced errors with penalties. And I think guys have to understand the value in eliminating those, especially when you do all that work. You did all that work to get the stop. You did all that work and put all that effort in, and to really, in a sense, kind of like erase it. So I think hopefully guys will learn from that.
When you look at the sacks on offense, how much of that is protection, and then how much of that is Ryder kind of needing to get rid of the ball? And then also, how tough is it to get a young quarterback like that to just throw away the ball?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think, when you talk about the sacks, pass protection, it's an all-encompassing endeavor. Obviously everyone's going to talk about the offensive line. How well did they protect, right? It also is going to involve, did the receiver run the route to the right depth, at the right landmark, on time, where he's supposed to be? The backs have a responsibility in protection. Sometimes the tight ends do. And then the last part, which you just touched on, is quarterback decision making. So everyone has a role in protecting the quarterback. And, if you take short answer is this: they're not all on the offensive line. There's quite a few times where if, we are, hey, take a drop, throw the ball on time, on rhythm to someone that is pretty open, I might add, there's no sack, right? And so now you're going from, okay, maybe having a negative play that puts you in a pretty difficult situation to overcome to, hey, you just gained a first down. And who knows, maybe you spin out of it, maybe you break a tackle. The more times you do that over and over, good things are going to happen. So really our offensive line, I'm not going to say that they're without fault. We're going to keep coaching them to play better and better. But they played, a lot of those sacks are not on them. So there are other parties involved with a lot of those. And frankly, a lot of those things, as I said, can be routine, and that's my job. As an offensive coach, it's my job to get our guys to, understand how to execute the plays properly. And so, I'm going to continue to coach and teach to try to make those steps forward.
And then with Ryder, no turnovers. But you mentioned there's a few things you want to see him improve. What are those, and what are the next steps for maybe getting him to have a good performance to a great performance?
Yeah, I think, one, you mentioned Ryder didn't turn the ball over, which is a real positive. So, at least a lot of, did he play his best football? He'd tell you he didn't. He's his second start, on the road, against a conference opponent. But the positive is the decisions, weren't all, didn't create turnovers. Some of the negative decisions. So that's a positive. But in terms of some specific areas we need him to improve, and that he's going to work to improve. And by the way, he's got everything it takes to do it. He's smart. He's a hard worker. He's intellectually gifted. But he's got to really, first and foremost, it starts with decision making. And again, that's ultimately it's my responsibility to help him do that. But taking just playing with a little bit more of a clear mind, and getting his eyes in the right place, making decisions on time. And, I think a lot of it, I talked earlier about competitive psychology. Sometimes there are things maybe he's done in practice. So what changed on game day? Okay, let's dig into that. Why did we have a change in mindset when we got out to the game? Can we approach it a little bit more like we approached it in practice, and let the routine things stay routine? And, there's that old saying, you take what the defense gives you, eventually they'll give you the game. Sometimes quarterbacks want to put on a Superman cape, and you live by the sword, you die by the sword on that stuff. And so if we can just get him to take what he's given, which is what I do think he did 2 games ago, we're going to be much better. And like I said, even some of those routine things, and he'll tell you this too, will help actually not just generate some, more yardage, more completions, but we're talking about explosive plays, game-changing plays.
With in Saturday's game, with with the problem with the field a little bit, excuse me, with the problem with the field a little bit, had you ever faced a situation like that where you're slipping as much as you were, especially in the first half, on a non-wet, not like on not bad weather?
No, we've never really quite dealt with, a surface like that. Now, look, both teams had to play on it. Everyone that goes in there has to play on it, so we don't want to make excuses or anything like that. But no, it's, when you go and play on bad weather field, you can, discuss strategies, whether, do you make technique adjustments, maybe it affects how you game plan, maybe it affects the equipment. Some people might say you put in 3/4 inch cleats instead of 1/2 inch cleats. There's things you can plan for. This was pretty different, and we did, we had a few plays that, definitely impacted the game, some of which, and it's hard to measure the cumulative effect of that, where, a no-yard gain becomes a 3-yard gain, a 3-yard gain becomes a 5-yard gain, the cumulative effect of what that does to down and distance. And then those are kind of the small ones. There's a couple big ones, like, Solomon Beebe slips. I think he's going to score. It's a play that's well executed, well blocked. It's a good decision on the RPO for the quarterback to hand the ball off, and he's going to score a touchdown. So there's some of those too. So it certainly, impacted the game. But, like I said, it's still conditions that we have to play with.
And with Jalen Kidden, is he healthy now? And do you still, moving forward, have a plan for all three to play?
Yeah, we're going to assess Jalen's health here, today and tomorrow and see where he's at. And then that will affect and determine, how we want to approach this game. We've got a ton of confidence. Again, none of these guys are perfect. They're young players. We talk about Ryder being a young player, but have a lot of confidence in him, have a lot of confidence in Jalen too. Again, we talked about Jalen when he, first got injured. The guy was leading the conference in passing, near the top of the country in a lot of categories. So, we're going to see where he's at, and and then go from there and figure out what the best strategy is to approach this week.
What's been the biggest difference have you seen from the defense in terms of these early stops? I think it's like 3 straight games now where they've stopped the opposing offense on their first possession.
Yeah, I think I'm going to probably sound a little bit redundant, but just keep playing hard. I think sometimes, you take the UConn game, for instance. UConn did drive the ball. We ended up deferring. UConn had the ball, on the first possession, and they did move the ball a little bit. They did drive, but you can't have a meltdown. Look, it's football. The other team's going to make some plays. That's going to happen. And, we talk about playing each play like it's got a history and life of its own. You can't let the success of the other team or a prior error you made affect the next play negatively. You just have to compete. And I do think that they are embracing that mentality, and I think that alone, football, as we know, it can be a game of inches. And that cumulative effort of 11 guys playing hard, playing fast, playing tough, it's just hard to measure, the difference that can make. And to me, I think that's a part of it. And then the other part, too, is I think Coach Russ, the staff over there, they've done a good job planning, and I think the guys are starting to probably gain a better understanding from a technical football standpoint, how to play in the scheme too.
You've pulled off one of these upsets that you're going to need to the next 2 weeks already in Protective. What do you learn from that Memphis game that what's the biggest takeaway maybe that you're preaching to your team to kind of replicate that starting with this week? Right.
Look, it's a new week and it's a new game, it's a new opponent. So I think, from a global standpoint, I don't think the intangibles in the game change any. I think you harken back to the same things we talked about going into that game, which was play with fanatical effort, have great poise, and stick together, have unity, support, and encourage each other, and bring a lot of positive energy to the game. And then from a technical football standpoint, the message was, we got to prepare really hard all the way up to game time, and really have a great understanding of what our job is, what we can expect the opponent, and then be prepared to adjust in the game. So, and obviously the technical football challenges that North Texas represent will be different than the ones that Memphis represents as a different team, different players, different scheme. But I think from 10,000 feet, just the global intangibles we want to play with are absolutely the same. And so I think that's where there's the carryover.
with North Texas, obviously a lot of people talk about their offense, but defensively they don't give up a lot of points other than maybe the South Florida game. But they get overlooked a little bit. But kind of what do you think about in your early study of North Texas defense?
Yeah, like I said, I think I do think they're very good on defense, and they've again, going back, where does it start? The players. I think they've done a really good job with their roster. I think they've recruited well. I think they've got really good players at all three levels: the defensive line, the linebackers, and the back end. And I think they've got pretty good team speed on defense. I think they run well. I think they run to the ball well. They pursue well. They have good athletes. They are well coached. It's a good scheme. They've got like really good base calls, but they've got good change-ups and compliments to them. So they do a really good job over there. And like you said, you can look at the result of the scores in those games, and I think it reflects that. So, the offense, obviously, it's a top, one of the top offenses in the country, very explosive, very dynamic. But the defense is a big part of the reason they're good. I mean, they've been very challenging for a lot of people.
And when you're, as an offense, when you're facing an explosive offense on the other side, I know you're not on the field at the same time, but how much pressure does that put on your offense when you're faced an explosive offense because they can, score and produce yardage as much as they do?
Yeah, it certainly can. I also think from a mentality standpoint, our players have to understand they're playing against the opponent's defense, and you can't control what's going on the other side. And everyone's got a different philosophy and approach to this. So I'm not saying one's right or one's wrong, but like one of the better coaches I've been around, when the defense was up, he wouldn't even let the offensive players watch. He'd say, "Hey, it's not time to be a fan. Stay focused on, the next series, the things we have coming up, because whatever goes on out there, it has no bearing, has some bearing, but shouldn't have a significant bearing on your next drive, taking on the defense." And so I think it goes back to that whole thing of, hey, control, focus on the things you can control. And so I think we've got to take that approach. It's a little bit like when quarterbacks compete. Sometimes quarterbacks make a mistake when they're competing against each other on a team. Well, I'm competing against this guy. I got to try to make another play. Well, really, all you can do is play against the defense you're playing against. And you can only take what that defense gives you on that play, that defensive call, that situation, that offensive play. If the other guy threw 3 touchdowns and the defense isn't giving you a look to throw a touchdown, you got to check the ball down the back. That's what you got to do. And my point is, when you get out there on offense, you can't press. If the other team is having success and they're scoring, obviously you got to, be amplified to do your job, to focus. But pressing and anxiety and getting so outcome oriented and getting worried about those things a lot of times actually leads to negative results. So I think it's really important that the offensive guys focus on playing against the defense one down at a time.
You good? Good. All right. Thank you, Coach.
All right, thank you.